So we are back for our next day of construction. Now, whether or not you have enough time to complete your project, or if you run out of time and you have to store it, that's gonna kind of depend on, what time you start your construction and all that kind of stuff. So I'm gonna take my pinch pot out of my bag here. This has been actually sitting for about 2 weeks since the last time I talked to you guys. All right. And right now, the clay is still soft enough that I can manipulate it and do a lot of things to it. However, it's a lot more firm than what it was when I got it straight out of the bag, okay? So clay goes through a couple of different drying processes, or a couple of different stages, as you will, when it dries. When it is completely wet, when it comes straight out of the bag, okay, as we're getting ready to work with it, especially the recycled stuff, all right, this is what we call green clay. And green clay is very soft. I can smush it, okay? I can roll it into a ball. I can do all kinds of stuff with it, all right? The clay that I've got right now, okay, is what we call leather hard. It's a little bit more firm, and if I were to bend this, it would probably break. The nice thing about this is I can still attach stuff to this, all right? If it gets any further dried out, all right, it's going to look something like this. Notice that it's also a little bit lighter in color, okay? So this is what we call bone dry. It looks like a bone that's been drying out in the desert for a long time. And at this point, it will just break in half, okay? These pieces are very hard, and you cannot attach anything to it. Go back to your diagram in the last video that I talked, in the video where I talked about how the drying process causes the evaporation and then it shrinks, okay? So this clay has already shrunk. The water is, most of the moisture that's in the clay has evaporated out, okay? Formed a little vacuum. All the pieces are much more condensed and tighter, and that's why it feels harder, okay? If you try to attach any wet clay to this, it won't stick, okay, even by doing that. The other problem is that this clay has not shrunk yet because it's still soft, okay, so I can still manipulate it. Now, if I still think, oh, I can still do it, and you wet this, what'll happen is the clay here will actually dissolve. It won't just get soft like this because you're only wetting a certain area. If you try to soak the whole thing, it'll completely dissolve and it will form that slurry that I talked about when we recycle clay. The biggest problem is that a lot of people will try to wet this, and then they'll wet this, and then they'll try to stick the pieces together, and it'll stick for a little bit, okay? But the problem is as this wet piece dries, what's gonna happen? It's gonna shrink, and as it does, it'll actually pull itself apart from the dry piece of clay, and it won't stick anyway, all right? So you've gotta keep the clay at least leather hard in order to be able to still attach things to it. Now, if you don't need to attach anything else to your project, no big deal, okay? You can let it dry out and then you can always carve stuff into it, but you can no longer attach or add anything to your clay, all right? So those are some things to think about as you're working, and why it's so important if you're halfway through your project or just getting started on your project. Save your progress by wrapping it up in a plastic bag, okay? So that way it keeps it from drying out too much and you can still continue to work with it, all right? Okay, so that's the drying process. Now, the other thing you're gonna notice is that on my board here, there's this little wet area. And what's happened is as this was sitting inside my plastic bag, all right, the wood actually absorbed some of the moisture from my project, which is why it got leather hard, or why it dried out a little bit during that time, okay? If this was just in a plastic bag, it'd probably be a little bit wetter, but some of it is going to still dry out. There is some places where air can get to it and some of the moisture will escape, but the wood is gonna act more like a sponge and it's going to dry it out. Now, in a normal day, in a normal school year, you're going to put your project in the bag, put it on a board, put it in a bag, and you're gonna store it in the cabinet, okay? Once you come back to class, let's say with the schedule that we have now, let's say it's even a Friday, it's only gonna sit Saturday, Sunday, and then we see each other all on Monday, and therefore it's only sat for 2 days. Those 2 days, it's not gonna dry out that much. It'll be a little bit more firm, but it definitely won't dry out too much. You'll still be able to attach stuff to it. So it's just very important that we keep things wrapped up in a plastic bag. All right? Next video, I'm gonna talk to you about some tools and how we attach 2 pieces of clay together, because yes, there is a process to it, and you'll need to know that for sure.